Bobby Fischer was probably one of the greatest geniuses in the history of chess. And honestly, by watching his games, we can draw quite a few conclusions that can help us improve our own chess level. In this lesson, we're going to analyze one of his games and look at all the lessons it offers us, because it's truly impressive. Bobby Fischer had the white pieces and played king's pawn, but was surprised by his opponent's unusual move, which was g6. At that time, these more modern structures probably weren't so popular yet, playing without occupying the center. And so Bobby Fischer thought, well, logically, if my opponent doesn't occupy the center, I'll make sure to place my two pawns on d4 and e4. This way, I'll have total control over the four most important squares on the board, and therefore, I'll have good control of the game. In this case, the game continued with bishop to g7, followed by knight to c3. For now, as you can see here, the player with the black pieces is attacking the center from a distance, not placing any pawns there yet. But it's true that this bishop is already putting some pressure on the d4 square. The game continues with d6. Naturally, at some point, black wants to play knight to f6, but it can't be played right away because here, Fischer's move e5 would be a severe punishment. For this knight, as you can see, it doesn't have any possible squares except a retreat to its original square, g8. These two squares are covered by the knight, g4 by the queen, and h5 indirectly by the pawn on g4, which would trap the knight. That's why black plays d6 first. Alright, at this point, it's true that white seems to have a huge space advantage. However, be careful, because this position has been deeply studied and black has counterplay. Bobby Fischer increases his space advantage with the f-pawn, f4. Be very careful when you advance the f-pawn, because you're opening up the diagonal that runs from h4 to e1, and that's an excellent diagonal for your opponent's pieces to occupy. In this case, Bobby Fischer had everything well under control. c6, knight f3, and bishop g4 from black. Alright, what happens when we face this kind of attack and our knight gets pinned? Well, for now, we can see that this pin isn't effective. Careful, it's not affected. Why? Because at this moment, you can't attack this knight with more pieces. But when they start attacking and doing weird things that you don't really understand, ask yourself one thing. What does my opponent want to do? Here, if we think for a moment, we'll realize that, for example, playing h3 would be a complete mistake because they could simply capture this knight. Bishop takes, and after queen takes. We would stop defending the d4 square, which could then be captured by the dark squared bishop. Therefore, we can quickly see that this bishop is threatening to play bishop takes f3, winning this pawn. From here, if we don't want to double our pawns with the g-pawn, so if we realize that, we need to react by overprotecting the real threat, which is the d4 square. How can we do that? Well, Bobby Fischer does it by developing a piece and defending it at the same time. With bishop to e3, probably the best move in the position. Now then, after this knight to d7, now is the right time to attack this bishop. And, in fact, we must do it with the move h3 before it's too late. As you can see here, Bobby Fischer, he threatened his bishop, which is pretty much forced to exchange itself for the knight since it can't retreat to h5 because of the move. g4, which would trap the bishop on the h5 square. It also couldn't retreat backward because it would end up very poorly placed, and most likely, with the move d5, it would end up being lost as well, although for now it could be exchanged here after pawn takes bishop. It could escape, or at least it would seem like it could escape, because after this g4, this bishop would surely have a pretty precarious future. Therefore, we can see that here, the black bishop absolutely has to be exchanged for this knight on f3. The game now continues with queen takes f3, and the player with the black pieces strengthens their center a bit from a distance. Okay, because the center is these four squares here, and they reinforce it from a distance with the move e6. Very well. Long castling by Fischer. He realizes that castling short isn't the best option because he's pushed the pawns on this flank way too far forward. And also, with this long castle, the rook is placed on the d file, which will probably already be keeping an eye on the weak point at d6. Do you know why? d6? Is it a weak point? Because its two side pawns have advanced, so no pawn is defending it. That's why it becomes a weak point and a target for attack. Knight to e7. We can see that white has a big advantage in development and space. So, since he's already castled, he can keep up the attack, as you can see here, right? Fischer launches his attack in a rush with the four pawns from f and g, quickly heading toward the opponent's castling. Watch out for the queen, f5. They're starting to attack us from the side. I'm going to give you a tip that you can always use whenever you castle long. Before your opponent launches any kind of attack, play the move king to b1. You'll see the grandmasters always do this because it's a really effective move. Not only does it improve the king's position, but it also defends all the squares around this castling. With the king on c1, for example, this knight is out of play because if it ever moves, the queen would come in through this h2 square. So king to b1. I call it the always useful move in long castling, and you should play it before it's too late. If you're a regular on the channel, you know that in many of my games years ago, I really struggled because I didn't make this move. King to b1, and trying to go on the attack before the right moment. Pay attention here. Rook to b8. Look at what black's pieces are doing here. It's obvious. If they play the rook to b8, it's to push the b pawn, right? What they want, clearly, is to attack our king. We're going to use one of the most classic chess patterns. The difference between all of us and Magnus Carlsen is that Magnus Carlsen knows way more patterns. And when he realizes he needs to use one of those patterns, he quickly spots it and applies it in his games. So I recommend you learn as many patterns as possible. In this case, we find the classic pattern for what to do when facing a flank attack. And it goes like this. Against the flank reaction, we're going to counterattack in the center. Against a lateral attack, we will react with a central attack. So at tower b8, how can we do it? Well, quickly with e5. Why does this pattern work? Because the center is always much more important than the wing. I've studied some games, which, if you'd like, I can bring to the channel, where it seemed that black was going to checkmate us no matter what. It seemed like there was no other way. And thanks to the central counterattack, we disrupted all of black's pieces. And black were totally, how do you say this? They weren't able to carry out the attack because their pieces couldn't coordinate well together against the king. Therefore, this central attack works really well. After pawn takes, we capture with this pawn because if we take with the f-pawn, these two pawns would be left hanging, and it probably wouldn't be as strong as blocking this bishop while opening the d-file for our rook, right? And the game continues with knight to d5. Alright, here, especially for those of you who are more novice, more beginner players. You'll see that they're threatening your knight with two pieces, and you'll think, well, I'll just capture theirs. That way I avoid any problems. And a lot of times, capturing just for the sake of capturing is the worst thing we can do in chess. Whenever you have to consider a capture or a piece exchange, you should evaluate who it benefits. In this case, if we play knight takes d5, it would benefit the black pieces. Even though the position would be good, they could play c takes d, they'd be opening the c-file to place their rook. That wouldn't be a good idea. It would be much better to move the knight away and place it on e4. As you can see, this knight on e4 is targeting not only f6, but especially the d6 square, which, if given to the white pieces, would be absolutely deadly for black, because the attack would be just too strong. So here, the black player decides to play bishop to f8, giving up his diagonal, which wasn't really doing anything anyway, and plays bishop f8. It's true that this bishop is delaying black's castling, but at the same time, it's defending this d6 point so that the knight can't get in. The idea now is that here, there are already quite a few threats starting to appear against white's castling. There are no defenders of the castle position, and you have to be careful because they can come in with the knights and bishops. And that's why you need to pay attention here, because I'm going for it. And here, a wonderful move is played. The bishop is moved back and placed on c1. Those of you who are more experienced will be more used to seeing this kind of move. The idea, and you can use this in your own games, is that the bishop on c1 is perfectly fine. A bishop on its original square, being a long-range piece, can come out whenever it wants. And what's more, it perfectly defends the castling, and above all, it has already cleared the way for the rook. That's why bishop to c1 is a very, very good move. b5 is coming at us with an attack. If we just sit still, we'll lose the game. So we have to counterattack. Now we're going to counterattack, this time with the f-pawn. It probably would have also been a good idea to attack with the h-pawn, although that would be a bit slower. f5, a very good move. b4 comes at us with a counterblow from the other side. Pawn takes pawn, and pawn takes pawn on e6, and now, how would you continue? Surely many of you are thinking, well, here I like, for example, coming in with a check here, right? For example, I like placing the knight on g5 to threaten queen to f7. Then the king would have to move, and this position looks wonderful for me, right? But this would quickly be neutralized. For example, with knight takes e5, attacking our queen. Then the knight could come in, sacrificing itself on c3, and after pawn takes, watch out for the rook. The queen will come in and checkmate us, so we have to be extremely careful. And that's why here, Bobby Fischer, with the cold-blooded style we're used to seeing from him, makes the last developing move of the opening that he has left, which is this bishop that's not doing anything yet, and brings it into play on c4, threatening, of course, one of the most powerful pieces black has, which is this massive knight on e5 that could probably cause us trouble at some point. Some really strong threat, especially on the f3 square. Careful, knight takes e5. It looks like we haven't avoided the threat, but this is very easily neutralized with the move queen to g3. This queen, what it does is prevent this knight from capturing the bishop, because with x-ray vision, it's threatening the rook on b8, which is completely undefended. That's why here the player with the black pieces needs to start taking advantage. Hey, for example, play bishop to g7 to castle and connect the rooks before it's too late. Bishop to g7, the main goal, logically, is to defend this knight on d5, which is now completely undefended. Be careful, because black always has counterplay with this bishop, the queen, and the rook to come attack our king. We always have to stay alert. Logically, we've reached a position here where we could already start to find quite a few winning combinations. Here, Bobby Fischer finds an impressive combination that's very hard to spot. If you want, you can pause the video to try to find it, but I assure you that if you don't, it's not because you lack skill, but because it's an extremely difficult combination. And I'm going to reveal it right now. The idea is to first eliminate this knight on d5 with the bishop, and after pawn takes, the move you had to see is this incredibly tough bishop to h6. Very, very beautiful indeed. The important thing, my friends, isn't whether you found it, but that you understand it now when I explain it to you. The idea is that this bishop can't be captured, because if it is, simply queen takes on e5 follows. And as you can see, the king is threatening both rooks at the same time, and this position looks completely won. The knight is also about to join the action, so capturing this bishop on h6 with the bishop doesn't seem like the best idea. So you might be asking me, well, what can black do here then? Because surely many of you are thinking, well, what I'm going to do is defend. This bishop, for example, with king to s7. That would also be a very bad move, because then the rooks would come in along the file. Phew, the king! He would have to move aside, and probably defeat would just be a matter of time. Besides, we always have bishop takes bishop, and then queen takes knight. Therefore, here, black finds a much better move, which is queen to 7. Not only do they defend the knight, but they also defend the bishop. Seems like the best move in the position, right? Well, here Bobby Fischer had the hidden blow, which is knight d6. Let's evaluate this position, because I suppose that those of you who love chess and are already more experienced will understand that this move is wonderful. And besides, we love to see this kind of move. First of all, you can't capture the bishop because you're in check, so you have to deal with this knight on d6. If it gets captured, they would simply lose the game, because bishop takes on g7 threatens the rook and also threatens the knight with 2 pieces. So no matter what, they would lose a piece. They move the rook, bishop takes, and when they move the queen, they would also lose the other rook. This would be a complete disaster. Therefore, it's clear that you can't take this knight, so what do the black pieces have to do? Let's see where they can move. This king. Logically, it doesn't seem like a good idea to move here, because then, simply, this bishop on g7 would be pinned, and there would be The brilliant queen takes on e5, and it couldn't be recaptured for the reasons we just mentioned. The bishop pin. The king can't go to f7 because the knight is there. Moving to square e7 doesn't seem like a good idea either, because then there would be the marvelous knight to f5. What a wonderful move. No matter what is captured, it would be followed by bishop takes bishop, threatening the rook, threatening the knight, and we'd be in the same position. Therefore, we come to the conclusion that the king has to move. Over here, king to d8, which is what happened in the game. But now, look at this geometric marvel of chess that, if you're more experienced, you'll spot right away. You can pause the video here. We have a winning combination, which is as follows. Look, it seems straight out of a textbook. Bishop takes on g7, exchanging the bishop on g7, and now the queen is momentarily sacrificed on e5. Queen takes e5. Logically, it must be captured, because otherwise a piece would be lost, but it's quickly recovered. Thank you. With this triple check, knight to f7, check, no matter where the king goes, the king will be recaptured with knight takes e5. And on top of that, this double attack is being threatened here. If they come to defend, this other double is threatened here, not to mention we have an extra piece. So, without a doubt, this game is absolutely and entirely won now. What you think? Impressive or not? Well, if you like this kind of lesson, leave me a big like. As always, I'll leave you all the articles. And I recommend for you to keep improving. Chess, right down here in the description. As a new feature, of course, you now have the masterclass prepared for you by Grandmaster Mauricio Flores, who has chosen the King's Indian structure, which is one of the most popular structures in chess and appears in most games, no matter which opening is played. He explains how to win with both white and black, and you can find it below in the description. You also have the book we wrote a couple of months ago, and you also have a free subscription to the newsletter, where every Sunday I send you extra content. So you have everything right down here in the description. It's all worth it. So I hope you loved it, and we'll see each other again tomorrow, as always, friends, in the next video. Goodbye.